Our story begins in a place reminiscent of a palace, with someone inquiring about some makeup. A young lady, covering her mouth with a fan, comments to a young man that she had heard of this before, and he replies that the woman seemed worse than the rumors. Then someone mentions not knowing where to look when a beautiful girl with purple hair appears, capturing everyone's attention. The woman, whose name we do not yet know, suddenly stops and stares at someone with a cold gaze. She then takes a step forward, moving in someone's direction, stopping in front of a man not too far away. The woman has a look that resembles a mischievous smile, holding the fan in front of her mouth. Then she slaps the man's face with the fan, and he is startled, asking what is happening. When the fan hits him, his wig flies off into the distance, and the woman, upon seeing this, feels no compassion for humiliating the man. However, the people nearby, seeing the wig land at their feet, are shocked and scream. They wonder how that woman could do something so cruel in that manner. And the man who was slapped looks terrified, almost crying, his face red, and his hand on it, probably from the pain. Trembling with fear, he still manages to ask Lady Deborah why she did that so suddenly, without any reason, and the cynical woman replies that her hand slipped. This was already a common scene, showing another woman who had also been hit by her fan, and the lady just said that her wrist had slipped. Shocked, they ask why the woman was doing such an absurd thing, and she, without concern, simply says that the oily face made her hand slip. Then, with a terrifying smile, she simply says to wash their faces well, throwing a handkerchief at the man. He must have thought the girl was stupid because he had an affair with one of his maids and broke his pregnant wife's leg by pushing her down the stairs, but still stood there in shock, trying to understand why he was slapped. Then suddenly, people were whispering and wondering what had just happened, also asking who had invited the girl to the party. The woman then lets out a sigh, saying to herself that they could talk about her as much as they wanted. Since they couldn't do anything against her, she took a glass of champagne. That young and beautiful lady was the daughter of Duke Seymour and could do whatever she wanted with the authority she had. At the party, the musicians played their instruments while the guests danced around the hall. The woman stood there, sipping her drink, indifferent to the stares. A woman then bit her lip in anger, glaring at the young lady. Calling her name, the young lady glanced at her out of the corner of her eye, as if it meant nothing. The woman was the Viscountess of Leffles and wanted to warn her that things couldn't continue as they were. However, before she could speak, Deborah placed her glass forcefully on the table and suddenly opened her fan, telling the woman to start talking, saying her name in a cold and frightening manner while looking at her with a snake-like gaze, which terrified the woman, as it really reminded her of a snake. Then she ran away, saying she just wanted to tell her to take care and not drink so much. Not understanding anything, Deborah stood there silently. But in her mind, she was freaking out because the woman had left so suddenly, leaving her nervous about the situation. Then she quickly drank her beverage due to the tension that arose after that. Her true personality was nothing like that. The girl was quite shy, and when she threw the handkerchief at the man, she was genuinely worried, wondering if she should have even done it. But even so, she didn't want to back down because she didn't want to be an idiot like she had been in the past. She would certainly continue to enjoy all the advantages of being the villain of the story without anyone knowing she was actually a fool. In the past, she was certainly considered one. When a man asked her for money, saying his aunt had passed away, and he was very upset about it, the woman started crying, feeling very sorry for what had happened. Then she said she had already transferred the money and was very sorry for him, who said the young lady was an angel, but she wondered how his relatives could pass away every week. Shortly after transferring the money, she received a notification from her bank saying that after transferring the 100 the man had requested, her remaining balance was only 3 rees. She also lamented that she had asked for material from a group project long ago, but no one had responded. And when they finally responded, it was only to apologize, saying they hadn't managed to get it and asking for forgiveness, leaving her tense at seeing the situation. In disbelief, knowing she would have to go to the library to do the work alone again. At night, in a tall building with lights on and people walking around the city, the girl stood there sighing, tired from the day she had, leaving lamenting her hunger, thinking of buying a small cake, but her balance was only 3 rees. She probably wouldn't be able to. When suddenly, she heard a voice saying not to step on it since it was new, and she was startled, seeming to recognize it. The young man then asked another if it wasn't a limited edition, and the other replied, saying he got the premium edition. It was so difficult that he thought he was going to die. The person showing off his shoe was Haejin Oppa, and the girl wondered if he shouldn't be at his aunt's funeral. The young man's friend asked how he got the money since he didn't work, making him tell the story of finding a fool named Yoon Do-hee. His friend said he knew the girl, and she, hiding behind a wall, listening to everything, was sad in disbelief, especially because she was called a fool. She then tightly gripped the strap of her bag, wondering if she was really so foolish that people only knew her for that. The boy's friend said he knew it was great to be in her group for projects because she did everything alone, and the young man said she gave money every time she cried over a relative. And the other, surprised, asked if she was some kind of ATM, commenting that at this point, the girl was already a professional fool. And upon hearing this, she took it as her cue to run away from the place, thinking about the boy who would hug her sideways and say he loved how kind she was, making her shy and embarrassed. As she ran, she began to lose her breath when her cell phone, which was in her bag, started ringing. She answered, and it was her mother asking when she would come home. And then, with her head down, looking at the ground, she asked why she had to return so soon. Her mother then said she needed her to come quickly to wash the dishes and cook for Do-jun since she needed to leave. Yoon Do-hee then asked if the boy couldn't cook for himself, and her mother asked what she was talking about now, so suddenly. If she couldn't cook for her younger brother, making the girl bite her lip in anger, holding back tears. Then, losing it with her mother, she asked if her brother didn't have arms and legs, and why she should take care of her adult brother. The woman then asked if the girl had gone mad, and she just hung up the call. One of her tears then fell on her phone as she stared at the screen, remembering that when people said she was kind, she cried more and more. She blamed herself for not realizing sooner that what people really meant was how convenient it was for them that she was a fool. Standing in the middle of the street, she wondered why she was so stupid when suddenly a motorcycle speeding in her direction. Crying, she looked back upon realizing it, not knowing why she had noticed something so important. And with tears in her eyes and the headlight getting closer and closer, Yoon Do-hee was run over and died. Thus, she had a meaningless death. Now she was there in Deborah's body, where she had reincarnated, in a transmigration of a tragic reverse harem novel for adults called Devouring the Black Spirit, where there were many handsome men. Deborah was there in pajamas in her bed, covering herself with the blanket, being the villain Deborah Seymour. In the place where Deborah was, one could see several portraits, lit candles, and a vase of flowers. She was still lying in a giant bed, wrapped up, wondering where she was. She was sure she had been hit by a motorcycle. How could she be fine like this? Then she got out of bed in search of a mirror, and when she found one, she noticed that her appearance was completely different from before. She was very startled because she was incredibly beautiful. Then she started slapping herself, trying to wake up, wondering why she wasn't succeeding. And with her face all red from the slaps, she wondered if this wasn't a hallucination, feeling the pain. Soon, a woman opened the door, dropping the food on the floor in fright, trembling with fear and probably cold, trying to explain something to the young lady in front of her. Then she suddenly knelt, falling to the floor, begging for forgiveness, saying she deserved to die, but screaming that she hadn't seen anything. And not understanding anything, Yoon Do-hee wondered what was up with the woman while she begged for mercy. Upon hearing that name, she knew it was familiar, but remained confused, until she remembered a book where the villain's name was from the novel she had spent all her coins on to read. Deborah was the villain the author had created to make the female protagonist suffer, and all the most liked comments were those that expressed hatred toward Deborah. A typical character who caused chaos, but ended up imprisoned in the end. Thinking about the character's description in the book, she'd realized that her appearance now matched perfectly. In disbelief, someone then appeared, angrily asking what the woman had done this time, startling her. A man in a tie and suit appeared, and Yoon Do-hee, in Deborah's body, automatically knew that this man was her father, Gorgeous Seymour, one of the 5 Archmages, one of the most talented in the Seymour family. The old man was such a cold character that even his expressions showed nothing. Marion Seymour had been the only person the man had opened up to, but she died giving birth to Enric, the youngest son. And then Gorgeous became colder than ever. At that moment, he was looking at his daughter with a terrifying coldness in his eyes, calling her pathetic because her hunger strike hadn't been enough, and now she was self-harming. Standing there, staring at his daughter, the old man said she was a disgrace to the Seymour name, and Deborah knew he hated her with all he had. Seething with rage, the old man continued to speak, saying she kept doing foolish things with her mother's face. What was so important about that jewel, anyway? And with this statement, Doi was confused, wondering about it, until she remembered that the pink diamond was the only one in the entire empire. Apparently, the girl had gone on a hunger strike to get it. That explained the hunger she felt. Furious, the man said there was a line even she shouldn't cross, even as his daughter. Then he turned his back on the girl, saying this was his last warning and that she shouldn't cause any more trouble because she was on probation. Trying to understand what had happened, Deborah wondered how a father could be so attractive, but realizing what she was about to say, she changed the word to brutal. The maid on the floor began to stutter, apologizing, begging 1,000 pardons because it was all her fault, leaving the woman in shock. Scared, Deborah remembered there were no human rights there or anything like that. So she told the woman to leave, and she started thanking her non-stop, cleaning up the mess she had made earlier. However, after that, Deborah began to feel dizzy and ended up falling hard on the floor. It was driving her crazy. She was outraged because she died for being a fool, and in this life, she wasn't the main character, much less the best friend of the main character. She was the villain of everyone, kicking the air, wondering why it had to be her. But still, it wasn't as bad as it seemed. The maid came, saying the water was ready while the girl just lay there, staring at nothing. This was her 10th day in Deborah's body, and every time she rang a small golden bell, all the maids would rush in. She was living with the worst reputation and was the villain with the worst traits she knew. But it wasn't so bad when they served her a feast every time she rang the bell. She took a bite of the food and praised the maids for being so good. Then, staring at the table with delicious food, she said nothing more. The women didn't say anything either, just stood there like statues, and Deborah wondered what kind of treatment they had received to be like that. But she believed it didn't matter since it didn't bother her. After all, maybe it was a good thing. One of the maids then asked if she had finished eating, and she said no and to leave because it was very inconvenient to have people watching you while you ate. It was much better to be a villain who messed everything up than to be humiliated by everyone, and the best part was that people always avoided her whenever Deborah's body did something she remembered. In her 24 years of life, this was certainly the first time she had lived with such luxury. Remembering that in her other life, at 6 in the morning, her sister was blow-drying her hair in her room, and her brother left the toilet dirty, who would have thought that a problematic life would give her such an extravagant one. Sitting at her table, sipping wine, she thought that if this was her probation period, she would never want to leave. A few moments later, a woman appeared with a beautiful smile on her face, saying it was a pleasure to meet her. The girl was a designer named Helen, and even though Deborah was grounded, she could still call her over. What she had wasn't just a golden spoon in her mouth, it was a diamond spoon. Everyone did everything for her, making it so she didn't have to lift a finger. The designer then asked for a moment of permission, turning around. Several women started entering with mannequins holding luxurious dresses, and Deborah wondered what that was. Frightened, she wondered why all those dresses were in her room, still not understanding, astonished as she had never seen such a thing. They placed jewelry on the table, and around her, there were more than 12 dresses. Her room had really turned into a VIP shop. The designer then began to say that she was very happy and that it was an honor for her to show all the dresses from her boutique to the Duchess. She was nearly jumping with joy, a smile on her face beside her. But she was afraid because Deborah wasn't saying anything and was worried the woman might not have liked it. Shortly before Doi possessed Deborah's body, the woman was angry, pointing at the designer, demanding she make her dress. But since the woman didn't have time and needed to be booked, she started trying to explain. But coldly, Deborah asked if that was a no, and then, almost crying and kneeling, the designer said she would make it immediately and deliver it. 3 weeks ago, Deborah had threatened her, so she was tense, showing all the dresses to her. The woman was scared because she had no idea what to do if Deborah didn't like the dresses. She then started explaining all the details of them, but when the princess quickly got up, the woman was startled, scared, seeing Deborah walk toward a slightly pink dress with flowers drawn on the fabric, making everyone tense. Reaching out to touch the dress, she was incredibly enchanted, wondering if this was the life of a rich person. She knew she would look beautiful in any dress in that room, and the designer was trembling with fear, thinking it might be better not to say anything since the woman was quiet. Then she approached her and asked what she thought, gathering her courage. And Deborah then sighed, looking at the dress. But she felt the urge to sneeze because of the dress's fabric, squeezing it, seeming angry. The designer, tense with this, began to explain that this was just a small fraction of the work they were doing. If a lady gave her just 3 more days, she could bring even more colorful and sophisticated dresses. And holding back the sneeze, Deborah looked at the woman, wondering if they still had many more dresses. The designer then knelt on the floor, begging, saying she would do whatever the woman wanted at that moment. And then she ran off, agreeing when Deborah told them to put more jewels on the dresses, making them even more luxurious than they already were. When the women left, Deborah brought her finger to her mouth, thoughtful. She was finally out of danger, sneezing. The jewels were really necessary, so she could charge for them. Now she was admiring her reflection in the large mirror. She thought her face was genius. Just opening her eyes gave the impression of a strong woman. And the girl loved that kind of face, becoming all smiley and cute, looking at the mirror. In her past life, the girl had a sweet appearance, and every 50 meters, people would stop her on the street to ask something. And then she made a wicked face in the mirror, knowing that now no one would come within 100 meters. Then someone knocked on the door, startling her. The person outside said some tutor was waiting, and Deborah was somewhat confused by the situation, wondering if she had a private teacher. You could see beautiful golden windows and red curtains. In the center of the room, the girl walked, wondering if the corridor had no end. With each step she took, she admired the things, wondering how much money was invested to achieve that. The girl envied Deborah for having such a house and even a private tutor since, in her past life, they didn't even pay for classes. Naturally, Deborah didn't do the assignments she was supposed to do, and her tutor scolded her and even hung her upside down as punishment. Deborah's memories were gradually surfacing in the girl's mind. This worried and frightened her since, from what it seemed, the girl had no concerns. Then she thought about how difficult it was to live with someone crazy, and she realized what might be happening, hoping she wouldn't have to live there trapped like a tiger, until a tall man with long hair appeared in front of her, leaving the girl confused. Surprised by the young man, looking in shock, recognizing him. He was certainly a very handsome young man with light hair, almost gray-blue eyes, and he wore round glasses that made him even more attractive. That was the second son of the Seymour family, named Beric. For years, twins had been born into the Seymour family, and the two talented ones competed to see who was better suited for the family leader's position. Probably because of this, the Seymour family twins had twisted personalities. The man looked at the girl with a cold gaze, saying he could hear her stupidity from his tower. Walking past her with such coldness, he said that Patrick was a scholar he greatly admired and expected his sister to behave that day. Leaving, he left her there with her mouth open, trying to understand what had just happened. Looking down in shock, she wondered who this Patrick was. Thinking about her brother, who had just passed by, the guy who had kidnapped and imprisoned the heroine of the story, Mia Benoch, that guy was a maniac. She then let out a tired sigh, thinking that if she were his sister, she would go crazy too. But compared to her family from her past life, this was at least cute. Besides everything that was happening, Rojard was working himself to the bone to be recognized as a family member, and in comparison, the girl was just playing around, not taking anything seriously. Holding the doorknob, she turned back, giving her brother a thumbs up, saying to herself it was thanks to him she was like that. Then she opened the door, stepping forward into the room. Upon arriving, there was a table full of books in one corner and another table with various papers, and a young man reading everything attentively. He was so focused that he didn't notice the young woman had already arrived, only realizing it when she had sat at the table with a serious look. Then the young man said they would start the lesson, making Deborah confused if this was Patrick she had heard about. Thus, they began their lesson on the history of Azovtia, the empire where they lived and where there was a family so powerful it was second only to the imperial family. In that place, there were 4 main families: the Seymour family, which stayed in the Tower of Magic; the Montes, who resided in the Tower of Spirits; the Orgos, who were in the Tower of the Sword; and the Viscontes, who were in the Tower of Gold. Among all of them, the 11th Emperor granted the authority of the Mage Tower to the Seymours for their help in strengthening imperial power, and this tradition had existed for exactly 500 years. With every word Patrick spoke, Deborah was even more shocked by these things, as she discovered that the first leader of the Seymour family had even contributed to the founding of the first emperor's dynasty. After her lesson about her family, she discovered that her father was really a duke and lord of the magic tower who had contributed to the founding of the 8th class mage. And no matter what madness she did, her direct line of the Seymour family would receive absolution. This left the girl in shock, mouth agape, as what she had gained was not just being from a rich family, but from a super rich and powerful one. But something made her think a little, leaving her astonished, because if she could do anything and nothing would happen, what had Deborah done to deserve such a tragic end as being imprisoned? In a separate area of the house, there was a specialized magic training field. The girl wondered if that was all she needed to do at that moment. As she entered the door, a young woman approached, welcoming her. Astonished, Deborah noticed that the woman was shaking like a leaf, and with that, she averted her gaze from the woman. The princess had kept everything she thought wasn't worth throwing away. But in any case, how many magic masters had changed? Remembering when she had raged at the women because she was unable to feel magic, she destroyed everything in sight, telling them not to make her laugh since she was in the direct line of the Seymours. The woman was furious because it wasn't her fault, but theirs for being insignificant and certainly incompetent. Now she was there, remembering all the memories, apologizing in her thoughts to the victims she had made in the past. And she wondered why she wasn't good at magic, as in novels it was always about magic. The Seymour family was famous for their affinity with magic. Looking at her hand, she wondered if she didn't have it because she was a villain. And then slapping her hand and saying that surely wasn't it, she scared the woman in front of her since she didn't know what the princess was thinking. Thinking about the character she had reincarnated into, she remembered that she was a person with incredible beauty. Smiling sheepishly, thinking if that was all. The woman in front of her was tense, asking if she wouldn't mind continuing the lesson, but in her thoughts, she was even more scared by the fact that the princess was calm. With that, Deborah turned her back and went in the opposite direction, and the woman tried to say she couldn't go that way, but the girl didn't care, remembering that she had become a villain due to her inferiority complex. Now in this life, the girl had no reason for that, so she held no grudges against anyone. In fictional stories, great characters always suffered from persuasion and envy, no matter how talented they were, so she knew that if she stayed quiet, she could live peacefully. In another place, with a beautiful crystal chandelier on the ceiling and a bathtub with roses, there was Deborah, relaxing while eating macarons, with one of her maids brushing her hair. In her thoughts, she praised the macarons. She had eaten more than 70 that day. At first, she felt bothered by needing company always by her side, but now it wasn't a problem anymore. The woman asked if the water temperature was good, and with a gentle smile, the girl said it was perfect while eating her sweets. Looking at her macaron, she only hoped that in this life, she would be mortal and thus only need to change the future of the original Deborah. And to start, she needed to find out the definitive reason that made Deborah end up imprisoned in the monastery. She was sure it had something to do with Mia Vinoch. Thinking about what she could have done, maybe pulling her hair, slapping her, or putting acid in her drink. What kind of evil thing had she done after all? And most importantly, she thought about a cursed doll with pink hair, button eyes in green and blue, and a very handsome guy holding it, the crown prince, Mia's fiancé. Because of the doll's curse, Deborah was accused of blasphemy. In an empire where sanity was more important than nobility, she had tormented Mia, the goddess of Saint Naila, a woman with an angelic appearance, pink hair, and light blue eyes. Whatever had happened, Deborah had managed to avoid the death penalty because she was the daughter of a trustworthy person, so she was just taken to trial, directly to the monastery, being imprisoned for eternity. Standing up angrily from her bathtub, she screamed in her mind that she hated endings like that, leaving the women there confused. The only secret to living well was not to mess with the heroine, returning to her bath at that thought. But actually, she was still in the first episode of the novel and knew it because so far, Deborah hadn't met Mia yet. Remembering that she had to fight for the prince, who was injured and fell in love with Mia after she saved his life, the man asked the girl with pink hair what he could do in return, and she said she had just done her duty, wishing only for the young man to get better soon, and he blushed when he heard that. And that was how it all started. The prince in his office wondered what he would give Mia for her birthday. While he was thinking about that, a man entered his office, saying there were diamonds at auction. Pink diamonds like the hair of a saint. With that, he looked at the man, knowing that was what he needed. Remembering this, Deborah knew what had happened. The pink diamond, the origin of all her misfortunes. The price of the diamond at the auction went sky high, and without her father's help, she ended up losing the jewel right before her eyes to the prince, who gave the diamond to Mia in front of her. Everything bad in her life started from there. Mia, who was innocent and knew nothing, was very happy with the jewel, with that pink diamond necklace she had received from the prince. However, after showing up at the academy, Deborah assaulted her, making her fall to the ground, trying to steal her diamond. Since Deborah was a child, she had been in love with Philip. Remembering all that, the girl sighed, knowing that it was just like her to do that. But thinking carefully about what to do, the first thing she should do was stay quiet and take good care of the diamond. Though that wasn't so hard, since surviving as Dowie had been much worse. All she needed to do was work hard in this life. In this second chance she had been given, she would be good enough, getting out of her bath with the women shouting that it wasn't over yet and that she would catch a cold. With a smile, looking down, the first thing she should do was have her father, Duke Seymour, who apparently hated her, as her support. In a large place in the empire, it was possible to see a painting with 2 swords on the wall and books beside it. Someone nearby with a hood was admiring everything he saw, nodding in agreement. Removing his hood, he was a very handsome man, extremely charming, staring at a bright blue jewel. Taking the diamond, he brought it close to his face, saying it was already done with a charming smile. The second diamond truly had a magnificent color. While admiring his precious gem, someone slowly approached the young man. Then a young man said that this time it would certainly have great demand if he put it in the jewelry store. With a charming smile, the man asked if he really thought that. Apparently, the great master hadn't liked his research that much and would be lying if he said otherwise. At first, the young man thought his master was a fool for inventing such colorful diamonds. The young man wondered if it would really work in the market. But after sharing the information and finding out a little more about the woman Philip was in love with, his master created a diamond identical to the color of the girl's hair. People were talking about such diamonds and whether they really existed, saying they would sell very quickly at the auction since they were unique in the world. From afar, Deborah watched the scene, hearing that Prince Philip was going to give it as a birthday present to the saint, making the girl furious thinking about the pink diamond. Opening her fan that covered half of her face, that diamond had been the first to hit the market. And everyone was talking about it because it was being sold at a very high price due to the competition among high-prestige families, so everything was going according to her master's plan. Staring into space, the young man asked, from the Vice Guild leader's perspective, who he thought would buy it. It had been some time since that man had been following the masters of the Blancier Guild, but he still couldn't understand the actions of the new master, so he replied, saying it would be Philip Montes. His master asked why that was. Then he began to explain that Deborah had been out of the Duke's sight for a long time, so she was probably put on probation after going crazy over a simple diamond. And the master, stroking his tiger, said he agreed with the young man, since there wasn't much Deborah could do about it, unless she gained the support of her father, the Duke. The man, very serious, was staring at important papers. Throwing them all on the table, he thought about how Deborah had been quieter lately, his daughter, who only thought about being extravagant and nothing else. She hadn't spent a penny for some time, and that was too strange for her father, since one day she had even gone on a hunger strike because of such jewels. Every time the old man thought about it, he felt even more second-hand embarrassment, using her own life as blackmail. Who would do that? He wanted to see how far this would go since, honestly, he had no intention of listening to the girl's requests. Quickly, a young man came running in, shouting for the Duke. The man, confused, asked what had happened for him to enter like that without notice or anything. He began to explain that Miss Deborah was digging in the rose garden, leaving the man in disbelief, a duchess holding a shovel. The man was so shocked that he was initially speechless, but he quickly stood up, furious, asking what was happening, starting to walk quickly toward his daughter, probably to see if it was really true. Almost running, he wondered how the girl dared to ruin her mother's flower garden out of spite. No matter what she had done until that moment, at that instant, the man was really furious. And upon reaching the garden, he found his daughter with her back turned. He immediately started shouting to get her attention, asking what she thought she was doing in that place. And Deborah, without paying much attention, continued with her back turned, until she turned to her father with a beautiful smile, happy he had finally arrived, startling the old man with that sudden attitude, because he remembered when his late wife spoke that way to him while holding Deborah in her arms. Tense, the Duke began to ask what the girl was doing there, And with a gentle smile, touching one of the roses, she said she was just taking a walk, admiring the roses, causing the man to have another déjà vu, remembering when his wife, while holding the little one in her arms, said she was admiring the flowers. The girl continued speaking, saying that it was something she couldn't see in the winter, leaving the man speechless. The man then began to think if the girl thought he would get angry because she was imitating her mother like that. And then, starting his speech, thinking it was quite clever, the man asked what the girl knew about flowers, saying she only understood jewels. Seriously, while staring at the roses, the girl asked her father if there was really any difference between diamonds and flowers. Then the man asked what she meant by that, and holding a rose in her hand, the girl began to say that the preservation magic on the roses made them have no scent and never wilt, and that diamonds were no different. Throwing the red rose she held to the ground, Deborah continued to speak, saying that this was the situation since there was no difference between the two. The old man, furious, showing it in his eyes, said that jewels were just a material luxury. He asked if she really thought the flowers her mother cultivated were no different from that, and with a cold look at her father, the girl said that those were not the flowers her mother had cultivated. She said that what made flowers truly beautiful was the fact that they wilted in the winter but bloomed again in the spring. The old man then asked if the girl didn't feel guilty for telling so many lies, and taking something out of her dress, she began to say that it was not a lie at all. Showing her mother's letter to her father, she said those were the words her own mother had written. The old man, in disbelief, reached out to take the letter. He wondered if this was the paper Marian was always using, taking it with a slight tremor in his hands. It was a letter from Marian written to Gorgias. The man, surrounded by the flowers, began to read the paper. There, his late wife said that flowers died in winter but were reborn in spring. That's why they were the most beautiful. Trying to form a sentence but failing, the old man tried to ask where the girl had gotten that. She then took a step forward, moving away from the flowers, saying she had found that letter there near the roses, with a charming smile. Walking through the palace calmly was Deborah, trembling with nerves from what she had just experienced. Thinking she had almost died of fear because her father was truly terrifying, she was certainly very happy to have found that letter. Remembering that her father thought the man was an idiot, the girl was truly happy to remember the complete original story since, originally, the letter had been discovered by Mia Vinoch, who had initially been kidnapped by the Seymour twins and taken to the Rose Garden. One of the twins was dragging the girl, and she begged him not to do it. Meanwhile, the boy said that if she stayed with him, all the jewels and that garden would be hers. He threw her to the ground without caring, asking if the girl was really that stupid or just trying to annoy him. With the fall, the girl managed to spot a small box that caught her attention. That night, Mia managed to sneak into the garden, finding the box, and upon opening it, she saw all the Duchess's letters. With this, she made a trade with the Duke to escape the wickedness of the twins, and he was shocked when he saw them. However, Deborah was confused because all of that was important in the story's development, and she wondered if she should really be doing this. But she was determined not to let the crazy twins kidnap the heroine, but first, she needed to stay alive for that. Staring into space, she thought about how strange it was. Because in the original story, the Duke made a deal with Mia only in exchange for the letters. Remembering a certain diary of her mother's that was also in the roses, the girl wondered why her father hadn't read the diary. And then someone approached her, calling out to her. A young man was asking what had happened and why all this was happening so suddenly. The young man was Deborah's assistant, who turned to him, saying that nothing had happened. However, besides everything, she had a question she wanted to ask the young man. In his office, the Duke read the letter repeatedly. With a sad expression, he thought about the garden in winter being very beautiful but very abundant. At least that was what the man thought, since the flowers always wilted in winter, and then he cast a spell on it. Since the flowers were truly beautiful only in spring, he went to the center of his beloved's garden, casting the spell on all the roses. Thinking that if he hadn't done so while cleaning the wilted flowers, he probably would have found the letters from his dear Marian. Looking at the greenhouse, remembering his beloved, he thought about having read the letters too quickly. Until someone knocked on the door, and without leaving the window, he said to come in. Quickly, Deborah entered with a smile, bringing a teacart, apologizing to her father. He looked at her, trying to understand what was happening, and asked what she was doing there all of a sudden. Trying not to show how scared she was, the girl said she had heard that he was overworking. So she was bringing refreshments and tea to her father, and as he smoked, he wondered what the girl was up to and if he should show that he was fine. Blowing out the smoke with a slight smile, he asked the girl since when she cared about him. Deborah was shocked to realize that, despite everything, the man remained cold, so apparently his only exception was truly Marion. The old man asked why the girl was still standing at the door with a foolish expression, ordering her to sit down. Surprised, the girl certainly didn't expect that reaction, since she had expected him to kick her out. And there they were at the table with various sweets, macarons, bread, and tea. Deborah's assistant, tense with the situation, told her he would step out for a while they were together. Remembering when he had told the girl that at exactly 11 o'clock her father would have tea, asking her not to disturb him since it was the time he was most tired. And with a cute smile, the girl had certainly ignored everything the young man had said. Handing her father a lemon tart, the girl said he must be hungry and suggested they eat together. It was the most famous tart from the patisserie in the Yosem district those days, and the man, sipping his tea, was left speechless. Deborah had read in her mother's diary that the Duke didn't like sweet things, so whenever they went out together, the Duchess would prepare lemon tarts for him. Bringing the tea back to the table, the old man said he hated sweets since they made him feel uncomfortable at night, but the girl insisted that he would enjoy it, making the man consider trying the tart. He took a fork, about to taste a piece, and when the old man quickly put the lemon tart in his mouth, the girl was still trying to understand. The small piece on the fork didn't change much since the old man just took a small bite to say he had eaten it, leaving the girl in disbelief, realizing that the old man really didn't like it. Then the man asked why the girl had come there so late at night, asking if she wanted something in return for finding those letters. Listening carefully to every word her father said, Deborah clearly heard that what she had found had a price. But the old man remained serious, saying that if the girl was going to ask him for the pink diamond, the best thing for her to do was to leave. And he would not repeat himself more than twice, staring seriously at his daughter, with coldness in his eyes. Then, with a gentle smile, Deborah began to say that she wasn't there in exchange for anything, but because she had come to deliver something, taking out a letter, which left the man somewhat confused. As he took it, he asked if it wasn't just one letter but several, and the girl agreed, making the old man ask how many letters she had. And she said he would only find out over time, leaving the man serious and furious. He asked if she intended to get the pink diamond under the pretext of having her mother's letters. Then Deborah quickly rushed to explain that wasn't what she had said, but that she would give him one letter at a time, since if he read them all quickly, he would be sad. Terrified of her father, the girl said she would leave since it was late. But with his arms crossed and legs too, the old man initially said nothing, until he said that since he had been working for so long, he was tired of sitting and needed to walk a bit, leaving the princess incredibly happy. When the man got up and headed for the exit, the girl stood still, and he asked if she wasn't coming too, making the young woman hurry. Then the old man began to explain that the tea was strong, and if he drank too much, he definitely wouldn't sleep well, so next time she came, she should prepare chocolate, making her stop in front of the door, trying to understand the point of next time. As she looked at her father walking ahead of her, she wondered if he had been concerned about her. And making the girl stop suddenly, the man said they would be seeing each other more often from that moment on. Sitting in a room while the man read the letter, the old man had a silly smile on his lips. And the girl was eating a tart, watching her father thoughtfully. Feeling like a mail carrier always delivering her mother's love letters to her father, it probably didn't surprise her. Maybe the man was obsessed, but she had already made 2 deliveries that week. There should be some progress. Then the man called his daughter's name, startling her. He continued to say that the girl had probably come to deliver the letter because she wanted something in return, and the girl agreed. The old man put his cup down on the table, asking if it was in exchange for a diamond. Knowing she needed to respond appropriately, she said she was only doing this because she was their daughter. So, upon seeing the letters, she thought it could be a bond between them. With his hand on the letter, the old man asked if the girl had time that weekend. When the girl agreed, her father said they would arrange to go out to eat. Quickly, the girl asked why, and the old man said she should have already returned to her senses, but probably wouldn't have any accidents like the other times. Deborah thanked him, and the old man said it was strange because he thought the girl probably wasn't as happy as she seemed. Deborah realized her father was very perceptive, as without doing anything, living a beautiful house, she was happier than ever. So, with a gentle smile, she told her father that she was very, very happy, especially because she couldn't go out. It was quite fun to have tea and be able to talk like that with her father. But still persistent, the man asked again if there was something the girl wanted. The old man continued to speak, saying he was starting to get anxious, so if there was something, please let her say it. But the girl just said that wasn't her intention. Feeling tense, she wondered if she had been too flattering. Then someone entered the room, saying that the Duke's subordinates were all gathered, making the girl a bit happy. The man then asked if it was already time, and the girl said that since he had things to do, it would be better for her to leave. Saying goodbye, she said they would see each other again on the weekend, leaving the man surprised as he looked at his watch. The girl got up and headed toward the exit. Behind the door, she thought about being so impatient because it was very difficult to score points with a cold father like that, feeling so much pressure that it was no joke. She was really trying not to do anything that day. Her handsome older brother began to say that even her way of walking was pathetic and vulgar, looking her up and down, making the girl wonder where he had come from so suddenly. As he passed by, he brushed his sister's shoulder, telling her not to even try to settle in, just to stay quiet. That could be a test. Giving a smile and looking ahead, Deborah looked back, hearing her brother's words, but she didn't say anything. But she wondered why that boy was always so insufferable. 2 days after that, it was already the weekend, and in a place that resembled a restaurant, Deborah was eating something that seemed to be delicious. Looking around, she wondered why there were no more customers there since the food was so good, and her father asked what was going on. Then the girl said that the business didn't seem to be doing well, leaving the man a bit confused. Then he said that the things she said weren't as amusing as she thought, surprising her since she was serious. And then, like a light bulb turning on in her head, the girl began to cry, realizing her father had rented out the whole restaurant. Well, it was quite noticeable since the cutlery had diamonds. Picking up his drink glass, the man asked if he would receive a letter that day, and she said yes. With that, the man began to say that ever since the letter delivery started, he felt very happy every day, asking if that had been the girl's intention from the start. With a contagious smile, the girl thought in her mind that it was exactly what she wanted, and then she said she was glad to see her father having fun. Thinking about how humans quickly forget gratitude but always remember merit, she thought that today she would like to deliver the letter to her father in a slightly different way. The confused man asked about the different way, and she said yes, asking if he could give her some time after they ate. As he picked up the knife to cut his meat, the man thought that, in recent days, his commitment to his daughter had become his top priority. Before, every day, he only thought about work, work, and work, always the same thing. Every day was really boring, so he agreed with the girl. With a smile, Deborah asked her father to close his eyes while holding the letter in her hands. Confused, the man asked in a way that showed he wanted to know the reason for that, and the girl said yes. She had said earlier that she would deliver the letter in a different way. Today, she would read it herself. With a smile, the man asked if the girl was planning to perform some kind of play, saying he didn't know his daughter had such a fun side, leaving the girl a bit surprised to see her father could actually smile. She then told her father to close his eyes because she needed to concentrate. He crossed his arms with a smile and said it was fine. With that, Deborah put her hand on her chin, deep in thought. She soon began to read, starting with having nothing and the cold making her heart ache. Listening, the man thought about that poem. It was probably something he recognized. The girl continued to read the beautiful poem, sitting there in front of her father, focused, with him also focused, his eyes closed. Then she folded the letter and placed it on the table. Handing it to her father, she asked how it went, and the man said it was certainly the poem Marion would have liked. He then said he wished he could read it, since the reading made the atmosphere feel more pleasant. As he began to read the letter, he noticed it was dedicated to him, saying that at that moment, he was reading a poem by Lance Schubert. That was her favorite poem at that time. It asked the man to close his eyes and start reading the poem since it made the delicate scent of the flowers linger at the tip of his nose. Every time this happened, Marion imagined her husband. While the man read, surprised and speechless, he started to speak, staring at the paper, asking why she hadn't said anything. The girl had found the poem and placed it in the letter. Then with a smile, she asked her father what he thought of the letter that day, surprising him by asking if he had enjoyed it. The girl was certain her father didn't know the poem and would read the letter. He had never felt something like that before. Furious, the man crumpled the letter with all his might. However, it wasn't Deborah's father but her brother, who was asking a young man who worked there why the girl was going in and out of the man's office and apparently even allowed to leave, and the young man said he didn't know why. However, the people with the eyes watching them certainly paying close attention to all this. Angry, the conceited young man said how much it irritated him. Something wasn't right, the furious young man said. When the man had told the young man that the girl was taking care of her mother's garden, he thought it would be the last time she did that. The man couldn't understand his father because, if he were in his place, he would immediately get rid of that humiliation that tarnished the Seymour reputation. But probably, if she debuted that autumn, they would have her married off soon and expelled. Deborah's godfather, Louis Gezel, had recognized the rose. It fit perfectly into the boy's plan. Slamming his hand hard on the table over some papers, he said that this time he would cooperate with the Rosart boy. It wouldn't be long before Deborah left. Feeling something in her ear, Deborah knew someone was talking about her. Her older brother was glaring down at her, and she ignored him from below with a cold look. Asking if they could talk, he asked what it was about. Right after that, he asked if the girl didn't mind because she wasn't up to his level, leaving her furious. Then he said that if she had nothing to do, she should go away, and he would give her some advice as an older brother. But the girl quickly said she didn't want it. But ignoring what the girl had said, the young man continued to talk about the fuss she had made over the jewels, leaving her in disbelief. Then the young man began to point out his sister's flaws, saying he was even worried about who would take her. The girl was in disbelief, having to hear all that, thinking to herself that he should stop being silly and just leave. He then placed his hand under the girl's chin, telling her she should be grateful, since without talent or intelligence, all she had was youth on her face. So he would introduce her to a good match. Furious, the girl slapped her brother's hand away, asking if he was crazy and what he was talking about. Looking at his reddened hand from the slap, the older brother said the girl needed to learn manners if she didn't want to embarrass the family. Again, the girl asked what he was talking about. With a smile, he said they would see each other soon. The young man's name was Louis Gezel, and the girl was shocked to remember that he was the pervert who was constantly hitting on the heroine in the novel. She wondered who would do such a thing on their own, saying that if he had ever been good at taking care of himself, he wouldn't have been involved at all. Furious, she said if he was so concerned about her life, he should give her money, leaving him in disbelief. Outraged, the hare asked how she could do things like that if she still thought that one day Philip would accept her. He told her to wake up because many girls were in love with him, and the girl said she wasn't interested, thinking about how angry she was that her brother was joking in such a way. With a foolish smile on his face, the young man asked if she believed someone from the Montes family would take someone like her with her behavior. There was no way a prestigious person could match the Seymours. He started to say there was no point in the fantasy of marrying Philip, and she cut him off, saying she wasn't interested, leaving him shocked at his sister's words. Serious, looking at the young man who was confused, trying to understand what was happening, she simply said she wasn't going to marry. Standing there, trying to understand what was happening, the young man was speechless, and she asked if he hadn't heard her, thinking if he was deaf as well as illegitimate. Tense, he said that if she was joking, it wasn't funny at all, and she said she wasn't. Shouting at her not to talk nonsense, he asked how she could give up on her duty and if she was really intending to join the monastery. Patting her head, he told his sister not to say that lightly, asking if humiliating her family wasn't enough, saying Louis Gezel was good enough for her and she would thank him later, but she ignored him. And the young man repeated that they would talk later, leaving his sister even more furious than before. Outraged, she screamed in her mind about what her brother was saying. Lying on her bed with one of her maids watching her, the girl wondered why he was talking such nonsense. But apparently, according to some Astian Empire law, it was true that all young women had to marry after coming of age, and she would turn 19 that year. According to the Empire's law, after their first bath, a person was supposed to get married without doing anything else. She was outraged, devastated, and furious, trying to understand how she had liked that novel with such a horrible setting. All her love cells had died, burned by a boy like Kim Han-ju. Now he was a pervert. Freaking out, she shouted, asking if she was going crazy, leaving the maid in shock. But her brother's voice was much more powerful than hers, and at this rate, she would end up marrying that idiot. Growing furious, she got up and waved for the maid to come over. The maid, already scared, immediately started apologizing. Then Deborah said she wanted to ask her something, and the maid, almost crying with nerves, asked what it was. With a cold and frightening look, Deborah began to ask what happened when a noblewoman from a family refused to marry, leaving the woman terrified, who quickly started crying and trembling, explaining that nothing like that had ever happened before. So Deborah got up from the bed and sat on the chair in front of her, demanding that the woman use her imagination to figure it out, and trembling with fear, she began to explain that, due to several reasons, she would go to the monastery. With that, Deborah was in shock, asking just to try to understand, and quickly the woman started apologizing again, shouting apologies and saying she was very sorry. Deborah was worried because this was no different from her ending in the original story, so that was why Belexkai was such an idiot. Mentioning the monastery wasn't just nonsense. She looked at the woman again, saying she didn't understand and asked if she had never refused to marry. She then asked what happened if a family, by chance, promoted an undesirable person in a marriage. The woman then remembered something, saying that now that she thought about it, there was a noble who escaped mercenaries and love, a place with no exceptions where people lived. Hearing that, she became excited and gave a sly smile, asking the woman to explain more. The girl then continued, saying she had heard that the young man managed to be appointed, so he had no problem since he was a 6th-class mage. Confused, Deborah asked if he had been appointed a war knight. Now everything was falling into place. Manhwa was the one with poor administration. Swordsmanship was for those without potential, and the hero's aura had nothing to do with it. She couldn't do that now. She was determined. What she needed was money to buy a title. In a hurry, the young girl shouted for the Duchess, asking where she was going. And she was happy because she knew exactly where she could get the money, opening her chest of jewels and gold coins. But she knew that money wasn't enough to go anywhere, since with that, she couldn't even buy the cheapest baron title available. If only the young girl had a little more time, because usually she needed to get married between 19 and 22 years old, so her plan was to postpone the marriage, save money, and in 2 to 3 years, buy her title. And since she was still studying, she could probably delay the marriage for at least a little while. Then, staring into space, she wondered how and where she could get money in that place, when someone suddenly knocked on the door, startling her and making her quickly close her chest. She asked who it was. When the door opened, the person took a few steps forward, calling her name. Her father was standing there, looking at her seriously, saying they needed to talk, frightening Deborah. The two were sitting, staring at each other, with the girl tense, wondering what could have happened. She was scared, because the man was probably going to talk about marriage. Tense and trying to play dumb, the girl said the letter would be delivered when she returned. Then the old man said he wasn't there looking for a letter, but rather to insist once again that if there was something the girl wanted, she should just say it, startling her. Trying to understand, the girl asked what he meant, and he repeated that he would give her anything she wanted. The girl was worried, wondering what kind of situation she had gotten herself into this time, but it would be great if she could read a letter to her father every time the flowers fell in winter. However, her father's interpretation of this was that the girl didn't want to be kicked out of the house. With a serious expression, the old man said there was indeed a bond between Marian and him, but still tense, Deborah tried to understand something, yet that expression gave her no hint of what he was feeling. The man said he wasn't trying to put her to some kind of test, so she could ask her what she truly wanted, leaving the girl confused. Deborah felt she needed to continue to deny it, but she handed him a letter, which he read, confused. Then, with an even more confused look, upon hearing the girl ask if he would like to start investing in her business, and with a smile, she said that if he accepted her, she already had many ideas and interests for one of them. Still serious, the man said it was madness, since he imagined his daughter would ask him for the pink diamond, wondering why she had such a sudden idea. The girl was writing something on papers, and her father stared at her, asking how much money she needed. Then she said that amount would be enough, handing the paper to the man, who, reading it, wondered about starting the business with that amount of money, realizing that maybe the girl wanted to start her business from scratch. And then he said he understood, saying he would send her the amount of gold coins she needed, making her shy because she probably hadn't expected that. And then, very happy with the situation, she thanked her father. The man was walking, probably with his assistant, heading to an unknown place, still thinking about his daughter's sudden business idea, wondering what the girl was planning with it. Then he stopped suddenly, thinking of something that might be the case. He was in disbelief because he realized his daughter had found an answer probably more valuable than the pink diamond. The old man had said he wouldn't buy the diamond for his daughter, so she believed going against his word would undermine his authority, and that's why she suggested not wanting an exact amount to avoid affecting her father's reputation. It all made sense to the man who was trying to put the pieces together. Thinking that he shouldn't worry about that, he noticed that lately her behavior had become more mature than before, reflecting on how his daughter was trying so hard and was certainly more mature now. When you become a father, you can't imagine your children growing up so fast like that. Then he turned to the man behind him, calling him. With a smile, he told him that no matter how much money he spent, he was to make sure to buy the pink diamond at the auction. And the next day, there was the necklace with Deborah's much-desired pink diamond. She was very confused about why it was there on her table, reading the letter that came with it. But she was sure that Philip hadn't received any offer, so she began reading the letter, which said that her consideration was welcome. However, it hurt him to have given pennies in exchange for such a precious letter. Pretending not to know what his daughter really wanted might have been the wish of an indifferent father. And upon reading that, Deborah stood up in shock because that jewel had cost over 40 million won in Korean money, also wondering what consideration the man was talking about in the letter. The girl was just doing things following her intuition. However, that made her somewhat happy for having managed to follow common sense. Being the villain of the story while being settled in was really quite pleasant. In her past life, when she was Yoon Do-hee, she was always surrounded by people, but when she once refused to go, they started insulting her, saying she had a bad personality. The girl at that time lived in vain, holding the necklace in her hand, admiring its beauty. That diamond was truly beautiful. However, if she put it around her neck, Philip would certainly try to kill her. So she had the brilliant idea to sell it and use it as a bribe, since if she went to the auction house, there was no way her father would know about it. But thinking better, she imagined her father furious for having ignored his sincerity, saying he would never listen to anything she said again. So she closed the little box with the jewel, saying she would think about it later. After that, she almost jumped with joy, thinking about the money she could grow more and more. She had 24 years of slavery in a very capitalist society and suddenly had 40 million won right in front of her. That answer about business might be a good reason to refuse marriage, and as she thought more clearly, she could get even more money. Remembering that she always needed to put the elements and helpers in the exact place. And while going through the letters, she saw something that caught her attention. There was a golden seal, and looking closely, she recognized the envelope. In fact, she recognized the golden seal with a cat that was also on papers there on the table. And the young man who had previously created the colorful diamonds was there receiving congratulations for the good sale of the pink diamond. Stroking his tiger, he asked how much it had sold for, but that information had been documented and filed, so he didn't know. Reading seriously through all the paperwork on his desk, he realized that it had been sold to Duke Seymour, and he was a bit shocked because he had imagined that no one could outbid Philip Montes. Not to mention that the offer he had received was much higher than usual, so he placed the letter back on the table. Looking at one of the gold coins, he realized he had really been wrong before. He had underestimated Deborah, even though she was Duke Seymour's daughter. Then he called his companion, Gerard, who looked at him tensely, asking if he hadn't ordered the man to keep a closer eye on the aristocrats. The man then apologized profusely for that, and the master ordered a Seymour informant to investigate Deborah again, even more thoroughly, wondering where he had gone wrong on that path. The man had a really strange feeling about all this. Soon, the assistant said a client was approaching. He raised his eyes, trying to figure out who it was. Then he quickly cast a spell to change his appearance. With a cold look, he ordered them to let the person in quickly. When the doors opened, someone hooded began to enter, walking toward the young man. The person was Deborah, who started approaching, removing her hood, revealing her long purple hair. Leaving the young man in shock, the girl stared at him as he realized who it was. Trying to understand as he stared at the girl, he wondered how she had gotten there. The girl then started approaching the desk where the young man was, who stared at her with a cold look, as if he didn't care much about her existence. Deborah stopped in front of the young man's desk, staring at him in that large room. In her thoughts, the girl was interested because she could finally see the prey of the Golden Viscount. That man was the key piece in all the prince's schemes in the novel, being the master of the Blancier Guild. For that reason, the man was the most competent and mysterious person in the original novel. But compared to Deborah, he was a mere character. However, finding a character like Isidore, a week ago, Remembering the envelope with the golden cat seal, the girl was lying on her bed, admiring it. She was sure that was the seal the Blancier master used in the novel. Usually, the man used the seal depending on his mood, and that was the seal he used when he was particularly pleased with something. It came from the chapter where the crown prince sought him out. When the hare arrived at the place, almost breaking the man's door, he sat in front of the Blancier master, saying that Deborah continued to harass Mia. The crown prince wanted to get rid of Deborah, but it wasn't simple since she was a descendant of the Seymours, and when a problem arose, that man quickly sought out the master, offering that if he found a way to dispose of Deborah, he would give him whatever he wanted. Then the master mentioned the rumors about how to curse people you hated, and Deborah was led to contact the shaman when the master handed her a box, explaining something. Without knowing she was caught in a trap, the woman even managed to make a cursed doll. Trying to understand about the doll for the prince, he asked how he could use it while the master sipped his tea, knowing he couldn't infer anything until it was all said. Then, as if his question were foolish, the master explained that it was just about making it known, and the girl would fall into blasphemy, simple as that. The prince got excited about that, agreeing with the man, because even the noble Seymour family wouldn't have any options against Mia's holiness and authority. Then the master looked at the papers while the hare explained that it was the price of the request. The prince also said he had added more rewards besides the land, and the master read everything with a smile on his face. The young man was happy because, thanks to the master, he could finally bring Deborah to trial. Paying attention to the seal the master would use, he said it was the first time he had seen that cat symbol, saying he even considered it to be just a decoration since the man didn't even touch it. With that, the master said he only used it after a satisfying transaction like that one. The seal the master used on special occasions was shaped like a cat, and the prince went on to say that besides that, he also liked girls. With a smile, the master said that the seal represented by a boy wasn't much different. After that, he started stroking his beautiful little tiger, saying the prince was joking. But what did it mean for a cat to keep its tail straight? The prince asked, prompting the master to explain that originally it was 10 pieces of gold. And since he was in a good mood, the prince would only need to give him 9 gold and 99 silver, and he would explain the meaning of the tail. For having passed on, he especially deducted 1 silver. Then the prince began to say something, trying to understand. And Deborah was there, remembering the prince, since thanks to the master, he was the most active among the nobles because he had no skills but always managed to occupy first place in the popularity polls. However, without the master, that character would be nobody, just existing maybe. But thinking about something suddenly, she tried to understand, remembering that the key to the prince's schemes had no law that said Deborah couldn't use it too. What the original version of Deborah lacked the most was someone she could trust, but there was no humanity because of the depravity that had been practiced at the time. So, staring at the letter, she wondered what would happen if she allied herself with the master's contacts, since the man would do anything for money, and Deborah, the only thing she truly had was money. That was certainly a fantastic deal. And eagerly staring at the envelope, she began to think, if she could get the master's help, it would surely be a good thing. Walking through the city, the Duchess saw the address of the jewelry store where she could finally find the master. It had been a week since she had that brilliant idea, and there she was, looking for the man. Riding in her carriage through the city, noticing the land was developing, the plots were all organized, so it would be perfect when everything was finished for the girl to invest in a future real estate venture, as she had been an architecture student in her past life. When a knight said they had arrived, the girl looked out the window to check. She spotted a large place where the carriage had stopped in front. The girl didn't remember very well, but she believed it wasn't a well-known place yet. However, this was where the first diamond that caused a major stir in the social world was made. Soon, this would be the most famous place in the entire capital, and as she opened the door, the bell rang. It seemed like a cozy place to eat something. The women at the door bowed to the Duchess, thanking her for her visit. But when the women realized who she was, they became tense, and she said she had questions about the pink diamond. A man hurriedly ran to the girl, thanking her for bringing her precious self to the store. He wasn't going to do it there, so he would take her inside immediately. Feeling tense, Deborah tried to finish a sentence, knowing that the only thing she needed to do was say a password that only the manager could hear. She then mentioned gold, leaving the man confused. Speaking quietly, she said she had come there to make a deal with the 7th prey of the golden dragon. The gentleman in front of her thought he would probably wilt and die. The man quickly said he would guide her to where the golden dragon was, making the Duchess almost cry with emotion. To be honest, she had no idea that this jewelry store had any connection with Blancia, and back in the present, there she was, in front of the master. And he was thinking that his luck had truly abandoned him, because never in his entire life did he imagine that Deborah would consider visiting that place. The young man's tiger soon walked stealthily toward the girl, making her very frightened, but trying to convince herself that she wasn't, knowing that this could finally bring an end to the Horen district. To ensure you don't miss the unfolding of this romance, give a gentle tap on the notification bell, and I see you on the next tale.